Hi everyone who managed to sign in once again. So sorry for this. We ran into some unexpected technical issues. My name is Julia. I'm the founder of Black Unicorn PR, an agency that focuses on startups and scale-ups to get noticed and participate in conversations across Europe. But that's enough about me. Today it's all about our guest, the one and the wonderful Yessi Bello-Perez from The Next Web. Yessi is a senior writer at The Next Web. And today she's going to be telling us a little bit more about her work as a journalist, as well as how to get media coverage in these weird and turbulent times that we live in. So Yessi, we managed to catch up on, life in Lithuania and Latvia during COVID. So how are things going so far?
Here in London?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, aside from what you think specifically about what the UK government is doing or not doing, life is pretty quiet. I think most people that I know are being sensible and staying at home, and those of us who can work from home are working from home. And I think everybody's trying to take it all just one day at a time.
Cool. Fab. So we have a few more people joining. So before we proceed with all the questions and starting the conversation, there's going to be a few housekeeping rules. So we'll speak with Yessi about, probably 40 minutes, a little bit less right now, considering that we were running late. 10-15 minutes before the end of our webinar, we will answer your questions. So please feel free to pop your questions in Q&A, which is at the bottom of your screen. The questions that we won't manage to answer right away, we will answer, a little bit later, because we're going to be sending out an email with this recording too. We are recording the session, so you don't need to take notes unless you really want to. So to warm up, Yessi, tell us a little bit more, about your experience as a journalist, where you're working now, what are you working on, and, just what you've been up to.
Okay, so if I go back to basics, for those of you who don't know, I write for a section of The Next Web called Growth Quarters, which is essentially a space for European tech startups and scale-ups. And the whole premise of that section of the site is to give people candid insight and advice to help them grow their businesses, right? So we launched in early February. I think it was around the 6th of February, at a time where nobody really even assumed or knew or could have guessed that, we were going to be in the situation that we're in. So clearly our content has changed dramatically. And we find ourselves doing more content geared towards helping people get through this uncertainty. So that ranges from anything about like business pivots or how to onboard people online, all the way through to, how can you work from home more effectively? How can you break up your work week from your weekend? Around the conversation around mental health is also really important. It's something that we're really trying to focus on quite a lot. So it's varied. And I think, it's fair to say that businesses have had to adapt. Of course they have. But I think, if you are a founder and entrepreneur, it's also important to realize that also journalists are responding to that change and trying to provide as much relevant content as we can.
So you've been writing quite a bit about, working from home, because I think for a lot of people, that's a sudden change. But even for those who have been working from home for quite, a long time, I've been doing a lot of work from home. Now it feels like one long Monday, I don't know if it's Monday, Tuesday, weekend. So what would be your top tips to working from home?
Okay, so similarly to you, I have probably not been working for as long as you have, but I have been doing it for just a little bit over a year. And I think the biggest thing that I've learned, especially in the past 6 weeks or however long we've been in this situation for, is to have a routine. And I know that sounds so cheesy, it sounds like straight up common sense, but it makes the world a difference. And that goes as far as, having a really good morning routine that sets you up for the day. One of the pieces that I worked on recently is actually about my whiteboard. When I kind of saw that things were going to go into the situation of lockdown, I invested in a whiteboard. I bought it off Amazon, and it's really helping me keep productive, but also keep on top of my deadlines. You can't see it now because it's behind my my computer screen, but I keep it immediately in eye view, and it's actually stressing me out a little bit at the moment because I keep and I can see all the things that I'm still
all the deadlines are still crawling up for you.
Yeah, but I think, you know, if you're lucky enough to have your own workspace, i.e. a room in a house that you can lock the door and get to work, that's great. If not, and you're unfortunately having to make do with a kitchen table, or, you know, even your laptop from the sofa, you just have to work with what you've got and try and set yourself time slots. A lot of the people that I'm speaking to are saying how they're really, really struggling to switch off for the day.
Yeah.
And like the day and evening just blend into one blur of work. And also a lot of people have been telling me that their employers are expecting them to also be available at weekends, which quite frankly I think it's madness, because, you know, your weekend is yours and that should always be the case.
Sure. Okay, so even more people have joined now. So let's kick off with a helicopter view. So from your perspective, how massive is the difference between before and now in the tech world? Are we better off, you know, in terms of the economy, plus, you know, the fact that we can use all the technology and we have all the tools available, or it's kind of in a stagnation period right now?
Okay, so I think I'm gonna get comfortable for this one. I think tech companies as a whole, like generally speaking, should be best placed to deal with this kind of scenario, right? Because generally, I do think that people working in tech are more used to working remotely. We do tend to have better access or more access and tech literacy, so tools such as Zoom and whatnot. I think in terms of business impacts, I think it's really going to depend on what you do as a company. So obviously, I wrote a piece very recently about how travel tech startups and scale-ups are being affected, and you know, they're going to feel the impact more than somebody that potentially working on a solution for like the gig economy or food delivery. I think there is going to be a longer term impact in terms of the amount of capital that's available for startups. So all my conversations with VCs, and I'm sure this echoes what you're reading on the press at the moment, but they are, genuinely speaking, trying to focus more on their existing portfolio companies as opposed to looking for new investment opportunities, because clearly if you can't meet people in person, that's going to have an impact on whether you invest in a founder or not. I think we're likely to see more follow-on funding. So VCs investing in, like, reinvesting in companies that they already have a stake in. I think Europe, I personally think the European tech ecosystem is much more mature than it was, say, 5 or 6 or even 10 years ago. I'd like to think we're not as reliant on, for example, US capital as we once were. Which I think is great, because I think the impact in the US at the moment is being felt quite drastically, and that's going to obviously have an impact as well on US investors trying to back European tech founders. I don't know whether that answers your question.
Yeah, no, totally. And that actually brings me to another question. Is now everyone's talking about obviously winners and losers. As we mentioned, I guess health and, you know, mental health apps now on the rise, but we have in decline, you know, travel startups. They're facing, unfortunately, nuclear winter, but still, you know, they want to communicate the message somehow. So what would be your advice for those who are in decline, you know, how they can communicate with the media in a positive way?
So I think to have the communications channels open is really, really powerful. So, you know, even if your story at the moment is not the one that you want to shout about because it's not necessarily about success, I think being very open about the kind of challenges that you're coming across as a business, and sharing knowledge about how you're solving them, and also how others can do the same, is really, really powerful. And that's something that would work really well for growth quarters, because that's ultimately what we've always wanted. You know, anyone on this webinar right now, if they have their own business, it's not always fun and games, right? There's a lot of decisions that go on behind the scenes that people don't necessarily know about. It's all about blood, sweat and tears. You've probably set up this by yourself and grown it by yourself, and it's, in a way, it's your baby. So I think people often think that speaking to the media is about relaying a positive message, and that's not necessarily the truth, because ultimately we're not there to promote your story. I think being candid and being honest and transparent, I think, will get you very far now, but also in the future.
So since COVID, for a couple of months now, have you seen the change in the stories that are coming through to you via PRs or founders? Is it all now just, COVID related or in the COVID context?
I think we've seen a real mix of both. I think the issue with people trying to jump on the COVID bandwagon is that sometimes they just shoehorn the term COVID on a press release, on a story. And that's something that I would encourage everyone to stay away from, because it doesn't make a story, right? If you come to me and say, look, we've had to completely pivot because of coronavirus, and this is why, and this is what we're doing, and this is what we're looking to do, that's interesting. You telling me that you've sent your workforce home because of coronavirus, everyone's doing that. I think it's probably quite hard for people at the moment, I guess, because we are trying as much as we can to pay equal attention to like non-coronavirus stories and coronavirus stories. But I think perhaps a lot of the positive ones are getting lost amidst all the noise. I wouldn't say that now is perhaps the time to shout about, I don't know, an expansion into a different country, because most people aren't necessarily going to be paying attention to that.
So it's still kind of important, obviously, to remain with this COVID context, but just kind of be more thoughtful about it instead of just putting it in the subject line COVID and, write something that is either negative or not even relevant.
The thought leadership piece is really interesting, because I feel like a lot of the content that usually does really well with our audience, particularly, is people that are, as I said, like talking about the challenges and also sharing advice on that kind of stuff. And we've had content so far all the way through from how do you sleep better if you're having problems sleeping, and how do you deal with that as a founder, all the way through to like looking after your workforce and making sure that you're transparent and a good communicator, but also people that have opened up and said, look, this is how we're dealing with coronavirus from a marketing and PR perspective. There is a real hunger for that kind of content, to be fair, because we're all interested in coronavirus, unfortunately, because that's the situation that we're in.
Sure. And, we have quite a good mix here of founders, startuppers, and PRs listening to you today. And in a lot of my talks, I talk about, the life of a journalist, what it takes. But I think sometimes when you hear it from a PR person, people will be like, you're just saying that, just because that's what you pay to do. But on an average, in your lifetime as a journalist, which has been quite, a long time, how many emails per day do you get? How many pitches and press releases come through your mailbox?
I'd say on a bad day, you're looking at 100 emails. And I think back in the day when I first started, I used to be really disciplined in terms of like trying to get back to everybody. Now I can't, because even the other day I was like making a real point of like making sure that I was going through everything, but it's just absolutely impossible. And I know we all struggle with the same issues, but like one email reply warrants another reply, and it's really bad. And I apologize to anybody on here if I've ever like not got back to your email, but it's just crazy. It's crazy because I don't think people realize necessarily that obviously we're having to deal with inboxes like everybody else, but also at the same time manage internal communication. So if you look at the amount of time that I spent on Slack, for example, like pitching stories to my editor and discussing angles and stuff, and then on top of that having to go through emails where perhaps I would say 80% of those emails aren't even relevant for me, or they've been sent as part of a massive mail merge. It's just icky. That's the one way I would describe it.
Okay, so I heard a rumor, and you will tell me whether that's true or not, that journalists do have naughty and nice lists when it comes to, PRs and founders. So clearly, if a certain someone sends you on a daily basis some sort of irrelevant PR pitches, you're quite likely to block them, I would assume so. And the ones who are giving you some good information, you're more likely to open it. So A, is that true? B, how to get on your nice list?
Can't speak for everybody else, but I do recognize certain names because I've seen them in my inbox many times. I don't necessarily block them, but I'm less likely to read them because I associate those names with like stuff that's irrelevant.
Yeah.
Similarly, I also recognize the names of people that I know will always send me useful stuff. So I don't have like spam filters set up for that kind of stuff, partly because I'm lazy and I can't be bothered.
Can't be bothered, yeah.
Yeah. But I kind of do it in here. In terms of like how to avoid getting ignored, I think it comes down to basics again. I think it's about researching the publication, researching the individual writer, really having a look at the content and seeing what we're covering and how. And then the first thing that I'm going to see, or any journalist is going to see on email, is the subject line, right? So stuff like if you see that I'm covering funding all the time, you're gonna have to make it really clear in the subject header, and that's going to make me want to click on it more. And then it's just about like the way you set up the email. You know, try avoid personally. Excuse me. Sorry, I've got really bad hay fever. Try and avoid attachments as much as you can. I personally, if there's a press release, I'd rather it be copied and pasted into the email as opposed to as an attachment. And if you do send an attachment, please don't send PDFs.
It's quite hard to copy paste, I guess, if you need some chunks of it.
Exactly. And you know, make sure that everything all the way through from like images, any asset that you think the journalist will need is there. But also, forgetting about the press release, your website for your business has to be clear and concise about what it is that you do, because I can't tell you how many times I've gotten a story that I think is interesting. I go onto the company's website and then realize I don't even understand what the company's trying to do. And you know, like hyperlinks being broken. So if you click on like a Twitter icon and it goes to Twitter and it takes you to Twitter as a site, but not their like company profile. I think if you have a Twitter account and you're not using it, that makes me think, well, what's going on here? Or like if the last time you tweeted was 3 years ago, that makes me question things a little bit.
It's a bit dodgy, isn't it?
Yeah.
Would you say, sorry to interrupt you, would you say that having, like, let's say you end up on someone's website, that it's important to have a press page, right? So where you as a journalist can get all the information right away? Because sometimes I guess some businesses can be quite complex, you know, let's say if they're B2B and very, very technical, you know, that I guess other businesses would understand. But for the journalist, if you have the press page, you know, with the press kit and all the information that you might need, is that something that you look for?
Yeah, definitely. And I think sometimes people have press pages, but they just use them to highlight other coverage, and that's not necessarily useful.
That's not really helpful.
Exactly. I think, you know, like exactly what you said, that layout in terms of having an information hub for the media, but also clear contact details as well, because often it's very, very hard for us, if we're the ones getting in touch, to get in touch with the right person as quickly as we need that to happen. So that's definitely important.
So timing is key.
Yes, definitely.
But essentially, you know, sometimes I do know a lot of like really, really good PRs and, you know, a lot of really fantastic founders who did their research, who, you know, sent you the relevant pitch, but it still somehow, you know, either gets ignored or, you know, doesn't really get published or the journalist's attention. Is there some sort of magic formula that will make you think, oh, you know, I'll open that besides the subject line?
Oh my gosh, so that is down to so many different things, right? Because it could just be that it's a really good story and it might be something that we would cover normally, but maybe on that particular day we're focused on something else. I think there's so many factors that can impact all of that kind of stuff. I think it's okay to chase, for example.
Yeah. How often though, and how many times?
That's the thing. I think if you do it more than twice and people aren't responding, it's probably because it's a no. I think there's different ways of getting people's attention. So, you know, if you think that your story is really right for me and I've ignored your email, DM me on Twitter and say, hey, by the way, there's something in your inbox about X, and it could be interesting to you because of X, and I think it would fit in really well with, like, say we're doing a particular content series, like I've got a founder that's perfect for your founder Q&A and this is why. I think it's also getting more difficult now, because back in the day when I first started, like, people used to actually ring up the office.
First, okay.
I hated that so much. I can't even begin to tell you, because I would always try and be nice on the phone and then like hung up and be like, ah. But it's very distracting, and I think it's difficult. But I think my biggest piece of advice would be for both founders and PRs to try and build up a personal relationship with journalists, and you can do that in so many different ways, whether it's on Twitter by engaging in conversation. Like, we tweet our stream of consciousness like all the time, you know, like, you don't have to agree with what we say or what we think, but I think just engaging with what we're saying is really, really powerful.
So Twitter is the mecca for journalists, it seems, because, you know, as you said, to find relevant content or what you've been writing about, or even engaging. But, you know, like, not a lot of companies, or, you know, not all of them have, let's say, a big Twitter following, or, you know, they're not extremely active there. So let's say if someone gets in touch with you and they have 30 followers and 7 tweets, would you think that it's a little bit of a dodgy company to kind of respond to? Or is that absolutely fine, so they don't need an actual, you know, huge engagement on their own platform?
I think in those scenarios, then you kind of have to do your proper, like, rigorous fact checking and looking into the people that are behind the company. So, like, you know, looking into the founder, what kind of track record do they have, where they've worked previously, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with having to do that. In fact, I think it's something that we should be doing all the time. Is it more legwork? For sure. Is it worth it? Half the time it is, because if you don't find something good, you'll find something bad. So you can always write about that. Not what anybody here wants.
Bad news is good news though, sometimes, especially in the media.
But yeah, that's the problem. I think the problem is there isn't a specific magic formula. I think it's very ad hoc, and I think it takes time. And I also think that if people have budget to hire a PR professional, then that's always something that you should look to do, because people like you have the contacts, have the experience, and know where to sell a story and what to avoid. I think the worst pitches I've had in my career are from people who are doing it themselves and think it's easy as firing off an email. And I think when you do your own PR as well, there's also a danger of you being too close to the product. So not only do you assume a lot of prior knowledge, but you also might struggle a little bit more with getting turned down, because the pitch is more emotional, right? Because it's your business.
It's your baby.
Exactly.
Yeah, what I find, I think, in terms of public relations, that most of the time it's managing expectations, because what might seem quite big and huge and fantastic for the company might not necessarily be relevant, you know, to the journalist or to the public in general. So it's a big win internally, but not a massive win externally. So a lot of actually founders and PRs are using MarTech tools such as Muckrack, Agility PR, and the sorts. Do you have any opinions on those? You know, whether it's worth investing money in for PRs and for the founders?
I can only really speak for how often I use them, and I would say I don't use them a lot. I think sometimes when I tweet out something with like #journal request, you get an inbound of messages from, not Press Club, is it Journal Link?
The Journal Link, yeah. There's journal requests, there's also a journal type of things,
And I think it can be really useful sometimes, but to be honest, I think I personally would much rather speak to the individual direct. So I haven't really had a lot of like positive experience with that kind of stuff, but it doesn't mean that other people in the industry, you know, they might love them. I think it also depends on the kind of publication as well, though, because when I was doing lifestyle journalism, you would completely rely on those kind of products to kind of ask for inbound on a particular product or service. So in tech, I don't really see a lot of use for it personally, but I think it just depends on what kind of business you're running.
So if someone wants to pitch you, would you accept pitches via Twitter, you know, like a full-on press release via your DMs? Or, you know, would you still prefer kind of the traditional way of getting kind of short and sweet email?
I prefer an email, but I think it's absolutely fine to start that conversation on Twitter. As long as the pitch is relevant and you can see a fit for it, for example, within growth quarters, that's absolutely fine. I think the danger that we're seeing a lot of the time at the moment is people sending me general stuff that might be relevant for the next web, and then me turning it down, and then people come back and say, oh, well, which one of your colleagues will be interested in this? I was like, I don't know. Do the research.
Google it.
Exactly. The fact that you're asking me already proves that you've not really looked into why it's relevant or not. And I know that may sound really harsh, but it's the reality, because at that point I'd move on to something else.
So in terms of COVID and PRs, how have we been behaving recently? Have we been spamming you with too much irrelevant content, or have we seen maybe emails and decline? Because as we spoke before everyone joined, that some PRs are facing quite a few issues themselves right now.
I think if anything, we're definitely getting more emails. I've noticed an uptick in my inbox. I think the really good thing that's come out of this is that people are being really, really creative in terms of what angles they're pitching and what stories they're coming across. I don't think you're misbehaving. I think at the end of the day, you're hired by a company or a business to do something, and your job is to therefore do it. And like, no issues for me whatsoever. I think if anything, it's a very challenging job to have at the moment. Yeah.
What about in terms of journalists? Has it affected you much? Not only in terms of the content that you need to produce, but generally, because we do see that obviously, some of the newspapers are letting the journalists go. Obviously, print media has been suffering quite a few hits a while ago, but probably now it's more noticeable than ever. So as a general, in terms of the media business, how is it?
I think there's a real danger of fatigue, and I'm not that affected necessarily because I work on online journalism. And so whilst COVID is part of the wider business conversation, I tend to have I'm very lucky in the sense that I can kind of dip in and out. I will say though, that I am in a WhatsApp group with, I think it's about 70 or 80 other journalists based in the UK, but also elsewhere. A lot of them work for the BBC, Sky News, big broadcast corporations, and they're really struggling. I think people often forget that before they publish a story, especially in broadcast, you have to see a lot of distressing footage yourself. And I think that takes a toll already. But then when you go home and everybody else at home is trying to talk to you about coronavirus and how it impacts their life and their friends, which I totally understand why you would do that, right? Because unfortunately it's affecting everybody. I think that can have an even bigger toll on your mental health. So there is a lot of people that I know of that are really struggling with anxiety, job uncertainty as well. But also journalists in the UK are actually classified as key workers. So also the anxiety of having to potentially expose yourself by going into an office to do a job that maybe 2-3 months ago wouldn't have even batted an eyelid over it, right? So not everybody is lucky enough to be able to work remotely. And I think, I think we're still in the early days, but I think it's going to get worse as time progresses, and if obviously a solution isn't found sooner rather than later.
And in terms of content, do you find that it's a little bit more difficult to produce exclusive, new, and somehow different content? Because obviously everything's about COVID right now. So as soon as you open any publication, COVID, and it's extremely difficult, to kind of sift through it. But from the journalist perspective, do you find it maybe this is easier right now because everything is pretty much in the same content?
I think it's very difficult. So in the business world, it's very difficult to find a lot of funding news, and I know those are coming through, but there's fewer than they were. So it might be harder to get a scoop on that kind of content. I think also a lot of people that are announcing funding rounds now, they were closed a few months ago. So actually it has nothing to do with business success in the wake of a global pandemic. It just means that you got the money 2 months ago and are only deciding to announce it now. I think also it's particularly challenging to find those kind of stories, because I think also companies are making a real effort in terms of not seeming tone deaf. So I wrote a piece about a company maybe 3-4 weeks ago. We published it on the website, and I sent them the link. I said, look, it'd be great. Obviously, you know, this is where it's gone live. It's up to you what you do with it ultimately, but you know, here it is. If you want to promote it on social, wink, wink, please do.
Please tag me.
Well, actually, we don't really think now is the time to kind of share this kind of stuff, which I understand, because ultimately, you know, it's a business that's been doing really, really, really well, and this is based on the like year-on-year like business performance and numbers, and they just felt that shouting out about their own success at the moment may not necessarily go down well with the rest of the community. So I think there's also a lot of people sitting on positive news.
Okay, but I do think that we're lacking some positive news, aren't we?
Yes, I think so. I think on a personal level, like I was absolutely fine for the first couple of weeks, and like last week and this week I'm genuinely like really struggling to keep optimistic. And when you're hearing about like what you were saying earlier, like people being furloughed, or people being laid off, or businesses having to ultimately completely change what they've been doing, or running out of money, like it is very hard to keep a positive mind. People are also saying, well, you know, this happened in 2007, 2008, and look what happened. We got all these amazing fintech businesses that came out of the back of it. But for some reason, I genuinely do think that this might be even more severe than what happened like 12 years ago.
And it's quite different because obviously, you know, that was the financial crisis. So I think for fintechs, it was just the perfect time to bloom and emerge.
Yeah.
Right now, pretty much every single part of the business, from marketing and PR to, you know, finances and budgeting has been, it has been quite challenging. Which brings me to the question of kind of, you know, looking forward. Everyone wrote about Zoom probably, right? Because Zoom became such an amazing, but somehow, you know, an interesting platform to struggle with today. But obviously, you know, what do you think is going to be in trends? What's going to be quite interesting besides, you know, the mental health? I assume, you know, some sort of financing apps and technology companies. What you as a journalist, what stories you're looking for?
Good question. I think this is going to ultimately change the way we think about things and the way we work. I have personal interests, obviously, in health tech and fintech, and how AI is like changing the way we do things, and I think that's going to remain. But I'm very interested in finding out like how people are creatively dealing with the current challenges. So, for example, there's a report that was out earlier today, based on PitchBook data, that was basically saying that a lot of VCs are going to shift their focus onto like collaboration tools online.
Okay.
But I think what's also going to be interesting is that those kind of sectors already have like quite established players. So I'm not entirely sure how much room, or if there is any room for people to kind of break into that industry at the moment. And if you do so, I imagine you'll have to have a very different proposition to what like key stakeholders already have. From a growth quarters perspective, you know, my interest in stories isn't going to change. I think we're still very passionate about giving people like actual actionable advice in terms of like growing their company. I think there's a lot of advice driven content out there, but I think a lot of it is actually quite like not common sense based, but I don't think people are being honest and transparent enough about the actual challenges and also failure. I know it was very trendy to talk about failure in the US a few years ago, and that kind of you know moved on to the UK and Europe. But I think there's something really powerful about that, because especially in an industry such as tech, where we talk about like serial entrepreneurs a lot, you know, sometimes people are doing really well with their business, but actually what people don't necessarily realize is that it's already their fifth or sixth business, and before they got to where they are today, they've had to fail and pick themselves up again about 4 or 5 different times. So I think for us it's actionable advice. It's also the human element. Like I'm much more interested in, obviously I'm interested in a business that's looking to solve a problem, but I think the people behind the business always tend to be far more interesting than the business itself. So the human element and how you interact with other people in the industry and the community is very, very, very important.
That's very true. And So a lot of the attendees that we have today, they're from the UK, US, and also from small European countries like Lithuania and Latvia. And if you are not kind of a big business, you are not coming from the market where unicorns are being grown quite frequently. When you come from a small market with a small startup, what it takes to make it big in the foreign media, right? So let's say someone's approaching you from Lithuania, Latvia. Are you quite likely to think, okay, these guys are cool, or will you think that probably they need to prove themselves in the big market?
I think if the company is doing something that is really interesting and there's a real case for coverage, being able to come to a journalist and give them that scoop is incredibly powerful. There's a lot of untold stories in European tech, and that's also something that we're looking to unearth more and more at Growth Quarters, because obviously, like, without personal bias aside, like, I'm originally Spanish, I know there are a lot of startups in Spain that are doing really cool stuff, but they don't necessarily get written about much, because the European press has historically focused on France, Germany,
UK.
and I know the Baltics are getting a lot more attention at the moment, and deservedly so. But I think it's up to the individual journalists and the publications to look further afield. And I think that personally, I think that is happening more and more. I think also the conversation has always been dominated by fundraising. So when I first started covering tech, a lot of the companies that would get coverage would be those that got funding, because in the eyes of a journalist, a VC investing or an angel or whatever, it kind of legitimizes the business in itself. I think that needs to change. There are a lot of businesses that don't need to fundraise, and that are either bootstrapped or profitable from day one. And I think that that's something that the media needs to focus on a lot more.
Okay, so we are 13 minutes, well, it's left 30 minutes left, and we have quite a few questions. So I just say, let's move to the Q&A. We have a question from Craig Corbett from Publicize. How long do you think before journalists reach COVID fatigue? When is the right time to start pitching stories focusing on the future rather than the current situation? For example, best tactics for impending recession, supporting impact businesses, boosting employment. That's a really good question.
Oof, thanks for that, Craig. Very good question indeed. I think people are starting to get COVID fatigue. I'm not quite sure we've got it yet, and I think that is due to the fact that a lot of us still don't know like the full implications of the pandemic, and especially in the short to midterm. Impending recession, yes. I think probably hold off on those for a bit, but I think if things don't improve by the summer, I think that's going to be a real turning point for everybody. So I'm not sure whether that completely answers your question, but I think it's one of those where you just kind of have to wait and see and like read the room a little bit.
Okay, another question is from Mark. In a timeline format, what topics and headlines do you see being picked up as we move through the peak of the virus and into the recovery stages? Speaking from the tech sector with global clients.
I'm not sure I understand the question there. So what topics and headlines do you see being picked up? I'm not entirely sure what
I think maybe in terms of the fact that, obviously that we're slowly going to be moving into the recovery stage. So instead of obviously focusing on all the negative, what topics do you think will kind of be on the rise as we go into better life, I guess?
Okay, yeah. So I think like in terms of like different types of working, so I know I've touched on it previously, but working from home and working remotely, the future of the office and the future of the workplace. I know there's been a lot of content already in the run up to this year and that kind of stuff, but I think that's going to be an interesting conversation. I think the automation of jobs, that's going to pick up again as well, and that obviously doesn't necessarily mean that people will lose their jobs to machines. I think there's going to be a combination of us working alongside them a lot more, and just the business, the way businesses are run. So higher transparency, more interaction with your employees, how that's going to potentially shift more online. I think people are also going to realize that you don't necessarily need to be in the same country or in the same city to do your job. life and work balance, all of that kind of like lifestyle content, I can see that's going to be pretty huge in the coming months, especially if we're all stuck at home. I hope that answers your question. And also, please, if I don't answer them properly, or you want more info, please ping me on Twitter, which is at Yessi Bello-Perez, and we're more than happy to pick this up afterwards as well.
And we have a few more questions. So another one is, how long the pitch to the journalist should be? That's probably coming from a PR person.
I would say you should be able to relay, convey what the business is doing in a few sentences, and that's basically focusing on the who, what, where, when, and why. I think you need to be able to give the journalist enough information for them to potentially bite and also contact you. So like, oh, this is interesting, but tell me more about this, to kind of get that conversation going. I've seen absolutely horrendous emails, like I'm literally talking where like the body text is about this size and like really badly formatted, and I don't care if it's Microsoft, like the equivalent of Microsoft today, I'm not reading that. No, that sounds very lazy, but that's the way it is. So I would say short and sweet, really concise. Avoid using stuff like the Uber off or like the Netflix off. You shouldn't.
It was quite popular recently. Everyone was an Uber or Netflix or Airbnb off something.
But you shouldn't use that language at all, because like you ultimately, it is your, like, it's the business case and the business name should speak for itself, and you shouldn't have to, it just seems lazy to kind of use those company names as adjectives, in my opinion.
Would you reckon people do that because they want you to open the email, because clearly, if in the subject line says we have established, or we have just started Netflix off, whatever, I guess, as we were talking about naughty and nice lists, probably you'll be like, not sure how I'm feeling about that, so probably you will just dismiss that.
Yeah, I'd probably roll my eyes at it, to be honest. Like, we want the next email. I know it sounds harsh, but I think
that's fair.
I think when people are sending those kind of emails, they probably think that they're the only ones doing that kind of stuff. But if you look at an inbox, like, you literally see it all the time, and it's not original. It doesn't tell me anything about the business either. Uber is Uber. We don't need more Ubers in the world. So it's best if you just are able to explain what you're doing with your own words.
And to recap, so obviously, when someone is pitching you, there's going to be like 1 or 2 short paragraphs straight to the point to get your interest. Should PRs and founders also send you a link to, the press kit, the photography, any sort of fact sheets, so you would have everything in one, or is it just, a couple of, paragraphs for you to ask for more information?
I think that's absolutely fine, as long as like you keep the pitch, the important info at the top, and then all of that stuff comes below. So in journalism, there's this thing with news writing where it's the inverted pyramid, which essentially means that the most important information comes first, because back in the day in print journalism, what they would do is just cut from the bottom, right? Yeah. So they knew that if they kept the first 3 or 4 paragraphs from a news piece, that the reader would get everything that they need to know in those paragraphs. And I think that's also good practice for pitching. Anything that can avoid making the journalist's life harder, I think, is definitely something that's really positive. What I'm not necessarily that interested in is people sending me links to their pieces in other publications, because sometimes you say to people,
it was written already. I mean, exactly. That was a story there, so why would you do the same? Yeah.
I think sometimes people say, oh, you turn a pitch down for whatever reason, and they're like, oh, but CNBC covered us. Well, good for you. Like, great. Like, that's obviously fantastic. It means you're doing really, really well.
Yeah.
But that's not going to necessarily change my mind on whether we're going to cover it or not. So.
Okay. And the last question that we have, and you guys, we have a couple of more minutes, so in case anyone came up with any questions, please pop them to Q&A. I assume this is from a startup. If we have super great stories to share with the world, should we already run and pitch it to the journalists, or should we fix our unclear and inconsistent website? Probably, as we spoke about it in the beginning, fix the unclear website.
Yes, I would make sure that anything that represents you online is sorted before you approach a journalist, just because it really does set you apart from other people trying to pitch stories. And it doesn't have to be like, when I say like a good website, it doesn't have to be like fancy, it doesn't have to be snazzy, it doesn't need to be perfect, but you should at least have the information that explains what you do, and also like who's behind the business as well, because that's something that I'm going to be immediately wanting to know. So it's great that this business is doing this and it's based in this place and blah 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 blah, but who's the CEO, who's the co-founder, who are the founders? At least management should be on there, because I'm going to want to be able to know like who they are.
Sure. Okay, so that is it for the question. I do have one more question for all the fellow peers that are listening to us. If you could do something with PRs, like one thing you would fix, about us, or the pitches that we sent, what would that be?
What I would fix?
Yeah.
Oh God, but
from the journalistic perspective, because by the end of the day, the role of a PR person is to cater for the journalist, to make sure that you have all the information, and on the same hand, kind of manage the expectations of a client or startup, saying that maybe BBC is not exactly the place for you to end up in. So what would be one thing you would like us maybe even to stop doing? Maybe calling you, following up via phone?
I think that's a really, like, what I genuinely don't agree with is the fact that journalists sometimes give PRs a lot of flack. And I'm being known to bitch on Twitter, right? But I don't name and shame. But I think like it's important to realize that it should be a mutually beneficial relationship. And I just think, I don't really know like how to, like, honestly, aside from the fact that maybe stop sending irrelevant pictures to people that don't find them relevant, anything else, like, I really don't, and get my name right. Like, I would give you the courtesy of getting your name right, get my gender right, because I've been emailed like Mr. Yussi, Mr. Yassi, all sorts of weird things. It's just like the basic.
Do screenshot those and just keep them somewhere and then put them on Twitter.
But yeah, like it's a tough job, right? Like on either side of the email, like recipient and sender, you guys are trying to sell a story. We are constantly looking for stuff to cover. So I wouldn't necessarily say that there's something that needs to be fixed. I think ultimately, if everybody was able to send like relevant stuff, then it makes everything a whole load easier, and it takes all the like aggro away from any possible like mishaps in the relationship.
Okay, so we have only 2 more minutes to go. Once again, I would like to apologize to everyone that we ran into some technical difficulties. I promise it will not happen next time. And before we turn the cameras off, Yessi, what is the best way for PRs, founders, whoever was listening to us, to keep in touch with you? We will obviously send out an email to everyone with the recording of the session, but maybe there's a preference that you have.
Yeah, I think for me, it's like number one is Twitter, because it's more dynamic. And then obviously, feel free to email me. My email address is Yessi, but it's spelled YESSI @thenextweb.com. And just mention that you were in the webinar, and then I'll know that we've already, well, not spoken, but you've had to endure listening to me for the past hour, so I apologize. But at least I'll know you got through that, so it's probably worth chatting to you.
Okay, fab. And actually, one more question just came in. Should the news be around that there is something new created, or could be a new approach, mindset, etc.?
Yes. So if you're looking for news coverage, there needs to be something new in what you're saying.
Yeah.
So most definitely an original. And also, the one thing that people don't often do is to actually spell out who the competition is, and then tell the journalist how you differ from those companies, because that already tells me a lot about your market and the kind of industry that you're operating in, but also where you sit in the market. So that's really, really useful.
Okay, fab. And the time is up. Sounds very evil. Thank you, Yessi, so much for joining us today. I'm pretty certain everyone had, invaluable tips from you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Stay safe and have a great rest of the week. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Bye-bye.